So we're going to go ahead and begin the last and final lesson of answering the anti-missionaries, Messianic Apologetics 101, Part 1. The debate is all you need on this. The debate is just this debate that you're going to hear this evening between Dr. Michael Brown and Rabbi Emmanuel Shochet will be an introduction to some of the tactics and some of the arguments that the anti-missionaries will use. Now, I want you to be prepared ahead of time, because as you listen to this debate, there may be parts where it actually maybe makes you a little angry at times, because you hear the shallowness of some of the debates. And understand that at times you almost feel for Rabbi Shochet, because he's obviously, this was before he had passed away, but he was a lot of anger and a lot of hostility towards the church, towards Christianity, towards Messianic Judaism. And not all feel that way. Not all feel that way at all. There are other debates that Dr. Michael Brown has done with others, such as Rabbi Boteach, which are much more respectful and much more challenging. This debate, in all reality, you'll find is probably not overly challenging. But I want you to hear some of the shallowness of some of the anti-missionary argument. And it's also good to hear Dr. Michael Brown's response as well. So it's Rabbi Emmanuel Shochet is the anti-missionary in this case. Dr. Michael Brown is a scholar. You will hear at the introduction of the debate, you will hear some about both who are involved in this debate. But Dr. Michael Brown is one of the foremost scholars on Messianic Apologetics, on the Brit Hadashah, or the Newer Testament. And it's a fun debate to listen to. But just be warned, there are some parts that might kind of tick you off a little bit. So with no further ado, we will go ahead and begin. Hold your questions to the end. If you have some questions, please feel free to take out some notes, write down some questions, and we will talk about those afterwards.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Garfield Green, student president for Arizona State University's chapter of Fellowship of Christian Athletes. On behalf of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, it's my great pleasure to welcome everyone here to Neeb Hall on the campus of ASU in Tempe, Arizona, this Thursday evening, March 30th, 1995, for the special event, a debate on the question, is Jesus the Jewish Messiah, between two international spokesmen and scholars, Dr. Michael Brown and Dr. Emmanuel Shochet. Without any further delay, I would like to introduce the announcer for this evening's event, Mr. Scott Hinkle.
Good evening and shalom. Tonight's debate will focus on the two related questions: is Jesus the Jewish Messiah? And can a Jew believe in the New Testament and still remain true to historic Judaism? Arguing the affirmative position will be Dr. Michael L. Brown. Dr. Brown, a Jewish follower of Jesus from Gaithersburg, Maryland, is a biblical and Semitic scholar, as well as a published author with a PhD in Near Eastern languages and literature from New York University. His books, articles, and sermons have been translated into more than 10 languages. He has spoken throughout the world, taking a message of repentance and revival to Israel, the church, and the nations. Dr. Brown has debated biblical questions with rabbis on the radio, on television, and on many college campuses. Arguing the negative position will be Dr. J. Emmanuel Shochet. Dr. Shochet is an authority on Jewish philosophy and mysticism, who has authored more than 20 books as well as numerous articles. Many of his writings have been translated into Hebrew, French, Italian, and Portuguese. a renowned worldwide lecturer on Jewish thought, ethics, and social issues, Dr. Shochet is the rabbi of Kielcer Congregation and professor of philosophy at Humber College in Toronto, Canada. He is widely recognized as one of the foremost spokesmen for Orthodox Judaism. And now to introduce our panel. First, the moderator of this evening's debate will be Mr. James White. Mr. White is the director of Alpha and Omega Ministries. He holds a bachelor's degree in Bible and a minor in Biblical Greek from Grand Canyon University, where he graduated summa cum laude and was a Ray Mabin Scholar. He also holds a master's degree in theology from Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. He is an ordained Baptist minister and has served as adjunct professor teaching church history at Grand Canyon University. He is the author of 7 books on such topics as theology, apologetics, and the text and translation of the Bible. Mr. White is an experienced debater, having argued a variety of biblical topics in debates throughout the United States. The other 3 members of our distinguished panel are Jennifer P. Norrie, Randy Nussbaum, and Michael Simonson. Ms. Norrie graduated magna cum laude from the Arizona State University College of Law, where she was a member of Law Review. In addition to her wide experience in litigation, she has lectured on technology exchange and intellectual property issues at the Beijing Institute of Foreign Trade in Beijing, China, and also served as a faculty member for the National Institute of Trial Advocacy. Ms. Norrie has formed her own law firm in Scottsdale, Arizona, where she currently practices. Mr. Nussbaum received his Bachelor of Arts degree cum laude and his law degree from Arizona State University. He is a member of the State Bar of Arizona and the Scottsdale and Maricopa County Bar Associations, for whom he is a frequent author and lecturer. He is a graduate of the Scottsdale Leadership Training Program and an active participant in the Scottsdale Chamber of Commerce, and has extensive experience in both coaching and judging high school mock trial competitions. Mr. Nussbaum's professional affiliations include responsibility for overseeing all continuing education programs sponsored by the ASU Law School Alumni Association, for which he is vice president. Mr. Simonson is a graduate of the Washington University School of Law in St. Louis, Missouri. He currently serves as Judge Pro Tem in Maricopa County Superior Court, Phoenix City Court, and Mesa City Court. I will now turn over these proceedings to our moderator, Mr. James White.
This evening we are privileged to have 2 very competent scholars before us who are prepared to give us the best their position has to offer. They have agreed to engage in a truly scholarly debate, one that seeks to concentrate on the substance of the issue alone. Many debates in our modern culture are marked by what I call cheap debating tricks. One or both sides attempt to win the audience's approval by means of humor, one-upmanship, glitzy presentation, or other emotional and subjective performances. Rather than focusing upon the issues and engaging in logical and sound argumentation, such spectacles use all sorts of improper means to sway the audience. One need only observe so-called political debates to observe how rarely the real canons and rules of proper scholarly debate are followed. This evening we have 2 scholars who are making mutually exclusive claims. They propose to offer objective evidence in defense of those claims. Such evidence would refer to proof or data that is normally accepted as carrying weight for both sides in the debate. Personal faith or belief, therefore, no matter how important to either debater, does not amount to proof and is therefore immaterial. To be more specific, Jews and Christians agree on the truth of the Jewish Bible, known as Tanakh to Jews and Old Testament to Christians. The Jewish Bible, therefore, is clearly sufficient proof or evidence for both sides in our debate this evening.
Whatever goes beyond this biblical text cannot be accepted as a persuasive argument given in proof of a point. Quotations from the Jewish Talmud, Midrashim, and commentators are sacred, meaningful, and convincing for a believing Jew, but do not prove anything to a non-Jew or others who do not accept these sources as authoritative or binding. Likewise, quotations from the New Testament or Christian commentators are sacred, meaningful, and convincing for a believing Christian, but do not prove anything to a Jew or others who do not accept these sources as authoritative. A Jewish person, therefore, cannot argue in a debate, "I know this to be the true meaning of the Bible because the Talmud or Jewish tradition says so," nor can the Christian in turn argue, "I know this to be the true meaning of the Bible because the New Testament or Christian tradition says so." All and any claims or allegations this evening must have to follow self-evidently from the actual text that is acceptable to both parties, either because it is stated so explicitly or because it follows clearly by way of the rules of logical deduction. All this does not preclude either side quoting or citing whatever sources they wish, provided that the debaters and the audience understand what the criteria or standards for proof are. Our debate this evening will deal with the two fundamental questions dividing the two positions. Number one, is Jesus the Messiah promised in the prophecies of the Jewish Bible? And number two, is it possible for a Jew to remain faithful to historic Judaism and also accept or believe in the New Testament? Before the actual presentations, each side will offer a statement of purpose explaining their perception and expectations of this evening's discussion. Having engaged in many scholarly debates myself, I have a few requests to make of you, the audience, and of our scholarly debaters this evening. To Dr. Brown and Dr. Shochet, I say that I, as the moderator, will be particularly strict when it comes to maintaining the agreed-upon time limitations. Staying within those limitations shows respect both for the audience as well as for one's opponent. And of you, the audience, I would like to request the utmost in respect for our debaters this evening. We have come here to listen to what they have to say. You may well feel the overwhelming urge to make an audible comment. Fight that urge. You may wish to express your wholehearted agreement with a particular speaker's point by clapping. Sit on your hands. You will have the opportunity of expressing your thanks to these men at the end of the debate. And further remember that any clapping or interruptions during the presentation only detracts from the ability of both speakers to do their very best. With that said, our format this evening, as you have in your handout, indicates the debaters will begin with a 4-minute opening statement. We have changed that to a 5-minute opening statement, beginning with Dr. Shochet. So Dr. Shochet, the podium is yours for your 5-minute opening statement, sir.
Good evening. I oppose in principle this type of debate because, first of all, halacha, Jewish law, disapproves of polemical debates. Okay, start again. I oppose in principle this type of debate because, first of all, halacha, Jewish law, disapproves of polemical debates about our faith, since A, it is basically a waste of time, B, another's religion is of no relevance to us, and C, debates may result in negative effects by unavoidably provoking the other side. Secondly, polemical debates have merit only where each side is completely open-minded and is prepared to accept the logical consequences, whatever they may be, even if that means to drop long-held cherished beliefs. In reality, that is, of course, mostly not the case, and debaters mostly seek to refute the other side and triumph over it, without regard to truth. For that matter, to suggest a debate to determine the truth about a most serious matter with strict time restraints of you speak 20 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, and the other side, and so forth, is rather an absurd tragicomedy. It's like telling a doctor you have 5 minutes for this part of the operation and 6 minutes for that part, regardless of what you may find in the patient. Thirdly, for Jews to debate missionary or evangelistic groups is especially offensive. To appear on the same stage to debate our individual beliefs creates a perception of two equal parties, two parallel religions, as it were. It appears to lend credibility or equal status to groups or individuals whose sole aim in life it is to deny and destroy authentic Judaism and to lead Jews astray. This we cannot do and never will do. We despise those who would destroy our souls, our spiritual reality, no less than we despise those who would destroy us physically. The interest in debates is not one of pursuing truth, but hopefully to score points for the followers and prospective victims. I may sound harsh, but I'm committed to truth. I agreed to come here exclusively for an objective pursuit of truth, thus I have no choice but to be open and frank, as opposed to saying one thing and thinking or feeling another. Fourthly, most serious of all, there is an aspect of dishonesty in having a polemical debate in 1995 on Christian allegations about Judaism. There have been numerous such debates over the past 2,000 years with Christian theologians or Jewish apostates, generally forced upon us by the dominant Christian powers, mostly with the threat that if the Jews would lose the debate, their communities would be forced to convert, killed, or expelled. We had to weigh our words and arguments most carefully, so as not to offend the Christian authorities and suffer dire consequences. Oftentimes we suffered at these anyway, because our opponents were furiously frustrated by failing to present valid arguments. That is another reason why we Jews don't like polemical debates. In short, we Jews have already been confronted by every conceivable question and challenge and already answered every single one of them. We have never lost a debate. Many of these debates have been recorded even by Christians and are readily available in books printed in many languages and found in numerous libraries, in addition to numerous polemical and apologetic works composed and printed in medieval and modern times. Practically speaking, this means that there is something basically wrong when somebody still wants to debate us on these issues. If they really want to find out what's what, they can simply go to a bookstore or library and find there the answers to all and any of their questions, plus infinitely more than they want to find. Both the Bible and the rabbinic writings have been thoroughly taken apart in these debates, with every possible detail discussed. Thus I question the motivations and merits of such debates and view them as cheap fishing expeditions for purely ulterior motives. What then am I doing here? A, to make these points public once and for all. B, to give the lie once and for all to the claim that the rabbis are afraid to debate or have something to hide. I'm not interested in attacking another religion, which is forbidden by Jewish law, or to try and convince Christians to change their minds or beliefs, etc. My sole and ultimate goal is to get missionaries off our backs, to say to them, leave Jews alone. You have nothing to teach us. You have nothing but your personal beliefs, things that you chose to believe in but cannot substantiate objectively. Thus, stop harassing Jews to change what you and we know to be absolutely true, the revealed word of God, for something that is no more than your personal leap of faith in the claims and allegations of one or more individuals of the New Testament, which you chose to believe, just as Muslims chose to believe in Muhammad, Buddhists chose to believe in Buddha, Parsis chose to believe in Zoroaster, Mormons chose to believe in Joseph Smith, Moonies chose to believe in Reverend Moon, etc., etc., etc. And to the Jews among you I say, return to your fold, to your roots, to that which we all know to be true. Stop speculating about concepts and beliefs alien and unacceptable to your Judaism, and get to know about yourself, your heritage, the legacy of your faith, your Jewish link to God. Distance yourself from mere allegations and unsubstantiated claims of strangers preying on your souls, and come back to that which we know for sure that it came from God himself, namely the Torah and its commandments.
Thank you, Dr. Choquette. Dr. Brown, your 5-minute opening statement, sir.
I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to be here tonight. I welcome this very much because we have a legitimate representative tonight of what calls itself authentic Judaism, which I will demonstrate to you begs the question and assumes what it wants to prove. It's been 23 years now that I have been actively following Jesus, Yeshua, as the Messiah of Israel and the nations. And I was told over and over and over for years by rabbis, by Jewish scholars, you only believe what you believe because you're ignorant. You only believe what you believe because there's no substance to it. I've been challenged over and over and over again. What is the evidence for this? Where is the proof? You have none. And I've offered for years, if I have none, then what do you have to fear by discussing things openly? So this is an opportunity for me to say, hear this man very carefully. Listen to what he has to say. Listen to what I have to say very carefully. Review our words and see where the truth actually lies. I would warn you to beware of sweeping, bombastic statements by either side that prove nothing. Some of which, in fact, I have already heard, namely that I and all other Jewish believers in Jesus here actually know the truth is against us. I would propose that tonight you'll see where the truth really does, in fact, lie. I personally heard on a videotape a challenge from Rabbi Shochet that he could not find anyone willing to debate him with a panel, guaranteeing that there would be logical discussion and deduction, and that he would even do it on live television. So I'm very happy to answer that challenge. And by the way, historically, the very first debates, according to Christian recording, we were told that we could check the records, say that the Messianic Jews decisively refuted their rabbinic opponents, according to Acts 18:28. Not only so, I've been involved in many debates. We were just told that no time ever has the rabbinic side ever lost. I'd encourage you to check and see. Check the records, look at recent debates, and see. Now, this is going to be my approach tonight. I will first seek to demonstrate from the Hebrew Scriptures that Jesus is the prophesied Messiah, explain why it was that he had to come 2,000 years ago according to the Scriptures, why he was to be rejected by his people, why he was to suffer and lay down his life as an atonement for the sins of the world, why he was to rise from the dead and be a light to the nations before his own people Israel would fully receive him, at which time he would then return and establish his kingdom on the earth. I will seek to demonstrate that from the Hebrew Bible. I was told many times, as a new believer in Jesus, that the New Testament authors shot an arrow, and then they drew a bullseye around the arrow and said, look, Jesus hit the bullseye. He fulfilled the prophecies, when in fact he fulfilled none. Quite to the contrary, I will seek to demonstrate that he hit the bullseye perfectly, and then later Judaism moved the target and said he fulfilled nothing. I'll do my best, time permitting, to refute all of the objections raised to Messianic prophecy by Rabbi Shochet. What I will seek to demonstrate is that there is no actual substance in any of the arguments. So if I'm unable to get to every single one of them, what I hope to prove is that each one raised has the full value of 0, so that 0 plus 0 plus 0 times 1,000,000 still equals 0. I will use rabbinic literature for two reasons. One, if I give you an interpretation of the Hebrew Bible and you say that's far-fetched, that's crazy, that's a later Christian view, if I can show you that this was also common in rabbinic circles, even among the rabbis, most all of whom rejected Jesus, then I can say this is not just some newfangled Christian view, but this is actually recognized as a legitimate reading of the text. As to the question of can a Jew believe in the New Testament and be true to historic Judaism, I will seek to demonstrate that it is the religion of the Talmud that is not faithful to the Bible, and thus I will seek to demonstrate the spirit and essence of Rabbinic Judaism, and you can judge for yourselves whether it follows. I have actually seen much fruit from debates because people get provoked to study more, to think more, to search more, to sift more. I'm not expecting in a few minutes to change someone's life course, although anything is possible. What I'm expecting is to provoke you to think, to study, to research, to open up your heart, to ask God, to get into the Scriptures. Having done that, I trust that this will produce much lasting fruit.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. We will now have a 20-minute position statement from Dr. Shochet. Let me mention that Dr. Shochet has the option of finishing a little early and transferring some of his time to his rebuttal period a little bit later. So if he does not use all the 20 minutes, that time will be transferred to his rebuttal period a little bit later on. So Dr. Shochet, your 20-minute position statement, sir.
Before I start and the clock starts ticking, just one comment. Viewers' discretion advised. Meaning that since you all know this is a polemical debate, so obviously certain things will be said that may appear offensive to some, knowing nothing of that sort is intended. You have to just take things as they come and in context. So, just want this to be realized. Where do I start this? Oh, that doesn't make sense. There are two basic issues to deal with. Number one, could Jesus be the Jewish Messiah promised in the Bible? Two, can one be a follower of both the Jewish faith and the Christian faith? Like a Hebrew Christian, Jewish Christian, Jews for Jesus, or whatever else they call themselves. The answers to both these questions are categorical no's. Why is it impossible for Jesus to be the Jewish Messiah? Mashiach, the Jewish Messiah, is a concept wholly and totally derived from and dependent on the Jewish Bible. For all and any information, one can depend only on the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible. To put it very briefly, there are 10 basic aspects to the biblical Mashiach and Messianic era. Number one, Mashiach is a descendant of King David. He is obviously a human being. God has vouchsafed the divinely sanctioned rulership of the Jewish people, the throne of Israel, to David and his descendants forevermore. To be the legitimate successor to King David, therefore, Mashiach must be a direct descendant in paternal line, son after son. For the Torah restricts tribal affiliation and succession to paternal descendants only. Number two, of Mashiach it is said in Isaiah, the Spirit of God will rest upon him, a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of counsel and might, a spirit of knowledge and of the fear of God. He shall be inspired with fear of God. Number three, Mashiach will come after the children of Israel will sit solitary for many days without king and without prince and without sacrifice. Hosea chapter 3. Number four, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem will be rebuilt to stand forevermore after Mashiach comes, as explained in the book of Ezekiel. Number five, the exiles of Israel will be restored from all the corners of the world to the Holy Land, the land of Israel, as explained in numerous passages in the 5 books of Moses and practically every prophet. This restoration of Israel is unconditional and will happen even if the people should not wish to return, as explained in Ezekiel. Number six, the whole earth, once Mashiach comes, will be filled with awareness, consciousness, knowledge, and perception of God and godliness. God's Spirit will be upon His people, endowing them all with the power of prophecy and vision. All mankind will worship God in unison. I leave out all the references. If necessary, I'll quote them later on simply to save time. Part of number six also includes that the Messianic era will be an end to evil and sin. 7. The Messiah will usher in a permanent era of universal peace and harmony, a veritable utopia throughout the world. Isaiah chapter 2, Micah chapter 4, Zechariah chapter 9. Even the animal kingdom will be affected, to the point that animals too will live in peace and harmony with one another. Number 8. The Messianic era will witness the eradication of disease, and all afflicted shall be healed. Isaiah 35. Death itself too shall cease. Isaiah 25. Number 9. In the final stage of the Messianic era, there will be a resurrection of the dead. Number 10. There will be marvelous prosperity with an abundance of every kind of produce. Now, not a single one, not one, of these prophecies applies to Jesus, both according to the well-known Jewish tradition, which rejects Jesus categorically, as well as according to the admission of the New Testament. Number 1, according to the New Testament, he was not a paternal descendant of David. And in Judaism, as said, it is only the father who determines tribal affiliation and succession. The mother determines the religion, the faith of the child, but not the tribal affiliation, as stated explicitly in Numbers. Number 2, he did not come after Israel was without sacrifices, a holy temple, exiled to all corners of the world. Number 3, the earth has certainly not been filled with the knowledge and perception of God since he came. Nor does all mankind worship God in unison, nor is there an end to evil and sin and warfare, nor is there universal peace and harmony among men and animals, or an eradication of disease and the resurrection of the dead. In fact, the world has never seen so much warfare, bloodshed, suffering, confusion, inhumanity, etc., as since the coming of Jesus, and very much, if not most, unfortunately, in his name. The idea of a second coming is a sheer invention without any source whatsoever, and contradicts even the words of Jesus himself, who promised that the Messianic age and redemption would be in his generation. Matthew, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand. This generation shall not pass till all these things be done. Little wonder then that his last words on the cross, according to John, were words of disappointment and resignation when he said, "It is finished," and bowed his head and gave up his spirit. According to Matthew 3, John the Baptist made the same prediction, and it's also found in Revelation, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass, things which must shortly be done. Behold, I come quickly. The time is at hand. So obviously, it was not meant even by the New Testament in terms of a second coming. Number 4, Mashiach is supposed to be a man with the Spirit of God upon him, a spirit of knowledge and the fear of God. He shall be inspired with fear of God. Righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins. Unfortunately, Jesus did not live up to this, as according to the records of the New Testament and the Jewish records, he was a contentious and witting transgressor and denier of God's laws and commandments and Jewish traditions. To wit, A, he condoned the capital offense of his disciples, violating the Sabbath as recorded in Matthew chapter 12, and in fact publicly violated the Sabbath himself on several occasions as recorded in Matthew chapter 12, Luke chapter 13, and Luke chapter 14. B, he denied and mocked the dietary laws of the Torah as recorded in Matthew chapter 15 and Mark chapter 7. C, he violated and mocked the need for ritual washing of the hands as recorded in Matthew chapter 15, Mark chapter 7, Luke chapter 11. D, he ignored the practice and laws of ordained fast, as recorded in Matthew chapter 6, Mark chapter 2, Luke chapter 6. E, he opposed and mocked communal prayers, as recorded in Matthew chapter 6. He violated and mocked the Ten Commandments precept of honoring one's mother and father, as recorded in Matthew chapter 8, Matthew chapter 12, Matthew chapter 23, Luke chapter 14. G, he denied the biblical permission to divorce, as recorded in Matthew chapter 5 and Matthew chapter 19. H, he violated the biblical prohibition against carrying a grudge and revenging yourself by cursing, threatening, and planning revenge against those who would not believe and follow him, as recorded in Matthew chapter 7, Matthew chapter 10, Luke chapter 19, and the first book of Corinthians chapter 16. And if necessary, I'll quote you these passages where this is recorded explicitly. I, on the one hand, he pretended to affirm and strengthen the rabbinic ordinances of the Pharisees, as recorded in Matthew chapter 5 and Luke chapter 23, and then turned around to warn his followers to beware of the teaching of the Pharisees, Matthew chapter 16. In short, we are presented with the picture of a man who violated the eternal commands of God as ordained in the Bible, sometimes using indefensible and immoral sophistry that others did or would commit the same violation, arguing in effect that two wrongs make it right, or irrational and other this type of arguments to justify himself. I'm not even going to touch upon the presumptuousness of arrogating to himself the power to stand above the law. I am the Lord of the Sabbath, make or break laws and commandments at will, forgive sins committed against God, or apparent blasphemies. All this is a very, very far cry from one inspired by and filled with the spirit of the fear of God. Jesus' behavior thus violated the explicit commandments of the Bible, which state A, Deuteronomy 4:2, do not add to the words that I command you, and do not subtract from it. And again in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 1, do not add to it and do not subtract from it, which is followed incidentally by the warning about false prophets leading Israel astray. And B, Deuteronomy chapter 17, 8-12, to turn to the priest or the judge at the time for all religious disputes, and then, and I quote, do as they tell you, follow all they instruct you, do not stray to the right or left from the word that they declare to you, which is the biblical source for the authority of the rabbis or Pharisees, whose instructions must be followed, and as Jesus himself suggests and recommends and demands of his followers in some parts. Conclusion. Jesus did not live up to a single criterion of Mashiach, the Messiah discussed in the prophecies of the Jewish prophets, addressed and and promised to the Jewish people and recorded in the Jewish Bible. As for the second issue, whether a Jew can remain a member of the Jewish faith and also believe in Jesus and the New Testament, the biblical passages from Deuteronomy just cited, forbidding any changes in the Jewish Bible, adding or subtracting, let alone accepting someone as a prophet or more, who himself violated the biblical precepts, already answers this question with a categorical no. Moreover, Deuteronomy 4:35 states, "You were shown," the revelation of God at Sinai, "in order that you may know that the Lord is the God and there is none beside him." None of the same word can also mean nothing beside him. Again, Deuteronomy 4:39, "You are to know this day and take to your heart that the Lord is the God in the heaven above and on the earth below, there is none other." This clearly forbids ascribing any divinity or authority to anyone or anything besides God, lest one be guilty of idolatry. Moreover, just as only American authorities can determine American citizenship, and only French authorities can determine French citizenship, so only Jewish traditional authorities, the unbroken chain of the authorities of the Jewish faith, meaning the Pharisees or rabbis, can determine membership in the Jewish faith. There is no need to mention that these Jewish authorities have determined that one cannot be a member of the Jewish faith while also accepting Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha or Krishna or Zoroaster. Indeed, even the New Testament recognizes this fact and rejects the idea of retaining Jewish religious identity and Christianity. According to the New Testament, the Israel of old has been superseded by the new Israel, the new Jews, the new seed of Abraham, which are all the believers in Jesus. And I quote, "For he is not a Jew who is one on the outside, nor is circumcision that which is on the outside in the flesh. But he is a Jew who is one on the inside, and circumcision is that of the heart in spirit and not by the written code." Romans. "Not all out of Israel are Israel, neither because they are Abraham's seed are they all children. The children of the flesh are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as the seed." Again, Romans. "For there is no distinction between the Jew and the Greek. Those who are of faith, these are the sons of Abraham. As many as are of the works of the law, Jews, observing the Torah, are under a curse. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free man, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus. If you are of Christ, you are really Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise." Now in Jesus we came near, for he made the both one, meaning Jew and Gentile, and broke down the wall of partition, that he might create the two into one new man, in one body, through the stake. There is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, slave, freeman, and so forth. Then you have a typical diatribe of Paul, anti-Semitic I call it, where he starts denying even that the Jewish people are the true children of Abraham, the true heirs of Abraham. And he writes the following, this is incidentally from Galatians chapter 4. "These are the two covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which brings forth children for bondage, and which is Hagar, the bondmaid of Abraham. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, corresponding with the Jerusalem of today, and is in bondage with her children. But the Jerusalem which is above is free, and is the mother of us all. We, brothers, as Isaac was, are children belonging to the promise. Just as then the one born in the manner of the flesh persecuted the one according to the Spirit," meaning the son of Hagar persecuted Isaac, "so also now. Nevertheless, what does Scripture say? Throw out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brothers, we are not children of the bondwoman of the free," meaning, in other words, that Jews are not the rightful descendants of Abraham, but those who believe in Jesus are. The very idea of Hebrew Christians as the Jews for Jesus, who would retain some Jewish religious identity, therefore, stands in direct contradiction to both Judaism as well as the New Testament. Indeed, the New Testament goes so far as to say that real Jews have nothing to gain from accepting Jesus. "If you are circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. I bear witness to every man that is circumcised that he is a debtor to do the whole law." Galatians chapter 5. So if you had the misfortune that at 8 days old you are circumcised, forget about Jesus. He's not going to help you anything. Moreover, if you're circumcised, like I just quoted, Christ shall avail you nothing. If righteousness is through the law, Christ really died for nothing. This man can no longer be righteous through the law. Though those who adhere to the law are heirs, the faith has been made void and the promise ineffective, because the law produces wrath. For all those that are of the works of the law are under a curse. Moreover, listen carefully, the law is not made, meaning the Torah, the laws, the commandments of the Bible, God's eternal commandments. The law is not made for the righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for fornicators, for men who lie with males, for kidnappers, for liars, for those who swear falsely, and any other thing that is contrary to sound teaching according to the glorious gospel, which was committed to my trust. First book of Timothy, chapter 1. Thus, even by New Testament standards, it makes no sense to speak of Jewish Christians, Hebrew Christians, Jews for Jesus, or whatever they like to call themselves now, Messianic Jews. These groups pretending to be Jewish and trying to fool themselves and others by observing certain Jewish laws, customs, and practices, thus violate the New Testament passages which I just quoted, which declare categorically that, as said, that if righteousness is through the commandments, through the observance of Jewish customs and practices, Christ really died for nothing. The execution of Jesus is the end of the law. It follows then that not only from Jewish tradition, but even according to the straightforward teaching of the New Testament, without interpreting, just reading what it says, not taking out of context, just the words as they are, the concept of Jewish Christians, Messianic Jews, Jews for Jesus, etc., makes as much sense as square circles, Jews for Zoroaster, kosher pigs, Christian Muslims, Christians for Krishna, and all other such oxymorons. Thank you.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear so much of the New Testament quoted. Unfortunately, I would honestly say that was the greatest demonstration of verses taken out of context and misinterpreted in the shortest period of time that I've ever heard in my life. Now, we were just told nothing was taken out of context. Everything was quoted out of context, just pulled out. But I want to go very briefly and deal with the key things that were said as quickly as possible, remembering that as we refute them one by one, doesn't matter if 1,000 arguments were given, 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals 0. And then I seek to take the rest of the time to demonstrate our point. We were told that there are 10 characteristics of the Messiah according to the Jewish prophets. What we weren't told was that not one single passage quoted anywhere in the Hebrew Bible or referred to mentions Mashiach. In other words, this is interpretation telling you that these are Messianic passages. How do we know that these alone are Messianic passages? How do we know that these tell the whole story? Not a single one said Mashiach. Now, what we must do is go through the scriptures and see how the Messianic idea developed, and then see what the prophets did speak of, and then see who fulfilled them. In terms of some of the specific objections, we were told, for example, that the Messiah was to be a descendant of David, and that tribal affiliation is determined paternally according to the Torah. And Numbers was cited. In point of fact, the opposite is true in cases where there is not a male father, so that the father, the male dies and only women are left, then tribal affiliation will come through the women, and you can find that at the end of the book of Numbers. What do you do with the case that, according to rabbinic tradition and certain passages in Scripture, it's understood that Messiah could well be a pre-existent one, in other words, greater than just man? Well, the New Testament gives us the answer. Through his mother, he is a physical descendant of David, but he is greater than David. That's the whole reason that the New Testament speaks of a virgin birth. So he is not just the son of David, but greater than David. We are told, according to Hosea, which I know meant Hosea 3, the Messiah will only come after years of exile and years without a temple and sacrifice. Quite the contrary. Hosea 3 says, only after many, many, many years of desolation will the people of Israel then seek the Lord and David their king. In other words, this is not someone who is now going to come, but this is after years and years and years of being without him that they will then seek him. Why? Because he had come before that time of exile. We were told, according to the book of Ezekiel, that the Messiah will build the temple. Where did Ezekiel say those words? We were told that there will be restoration after Messiah comes. Where did the prophets explicitly say those words? We were told that when the Messiah comes, there will be no more evil or sin. The glory of God will fill the earth. It is true, there are many prophecies about the Messiah, the King, who will bring all these things to pass. But none of these passages mention, none of these so-called descriptions of the Messiah mention the problem of human sin. We don't need a king to just show up one day. We don't need someone to snap their fingers and suddenly there's no more war. It's like our dear respected former president, Jimmy Carter, going to Bosnia, and now there's peace. It doesn't just happen so easily unless there's a heart change. I'll show you that Messiah first had to come and deal with sin, that he was not just a king, but also a priest. We were told that there will be no disease when Messiah comes, according to Isaiah 35. Isaiah 35, again, does not explicitly mention Messiah, but it does say that there will be great miracles of healing, which in fact were the hallmark of Jesus' ministry. We were told, for example, that the second coming is a myth and contradicts Jesus' own words. Jesus is the one that said that the kingdom of God would be like a king going into a distant country, and people would all think he was delaying his coming. So it would only be after a long period that he would return. What about some of the passages referred to briefly, like Matthew 16? There's some tasting here who will not see death until the Son of Man comes in the glory of his kingdom. Keep reading into the very next chapter, Matthew 17, where it says that he was glorified in their presence and there was a manifestation of the kingdom. Matthew, Mark, Luke all have that same sequence. What of Matthew 24? All these things will be fulfilled before this generation passes. The Greek word generation can also be spoken and translated nation. The very same word is also nation, meaning this particular race. This particular race, the Jewish people, is still here. And many of those prophecies of which he did speak were fulfilled in that first generation of Israel also. The words of Jesus on the cross, "It is finished," are not words of defeat, but words saying, "It has all been accomplished." Read John 19:28 before you read John 19:30. We're told that Jesus was a contentious transgressor. Let me just read you a couple of quotes, just so you can hear what other Jewish scholars say. This is not proof, but I just want you to know that Rabbi Shochet's position is not the only position. According to Rabbi Leo Beck, who was a great defender of Judaism in the years of the Holocaust in Germany, he said, Jesus is a genuine Jewish personality. All his struggles and works, his bearing and feeling, his speech and silence bear the stamp of a Jewish style. He was a Jew among Jews. According to Martin Buber, respected professor from Hebrew University 2 generations ago, he said, we must overcome the superstitious fear which we harbor about the Messianic movement of Jesus, and we must place the movement where it belongs, namely in the spiritual history of Judaism. According to the great Israeli scholar of last generation, Joseph Klausner, Jesus was a Jew and he remained a Jew until his last breath. His one idea was to implant within his nation the idea of the coming of the Messiah. And all this, Jesus is the most Jewish of Jews, more Jewish than Hillel. From the standpoint of general humanity, he is indeed a light to the Gentiles. According to modern Orthodox Israeli scholar Pinchas Lapid, Jesus was utterly true to the Torah, as I myself hope to be. I even suspect that Jesus was even more true to the Torah than I, an Orthodox Jew. Strange that there's such different views here. According to a recent presentation by Rabbi Professor Shia Cohen, a respected historian at the Jewish Theological Seminary, he said the old view was that Jesus was a lawbreaker. Now we realize that he was an absolute Torah-keeping, observant Jew, although he differed with some of the rabbinic traditions in his day, and there were many different traditions and many different viewpoints, just as today there were Reform Jews and Conservative and Orthodox and Ultra-Orthodox and Hasidic, etc., etc. There were different views then. Jesus is considered by modern Jewish scholarship to have been totally faithful to the biblical law, although rejecting some current traditions. The one true God. And when they realized that, although for years they resisted the words of the missionaries, the Boardmans, George and Sarah Boardman, suddenly tens of thousands of them were converted and were baptized. This type of thing has happened around the world. In other words, God is supernaturally backing up this message, and through this message, the light of the one true God is going around the world, distinguishing it, in fact, from all other religions and all other faiths.
Dr. Shochet, your 2-minute rebuttal, sir.
Again, I'm amazed. I really don't understand this. Atonement, first of all, the Muslims preach exactly the same type of atonement. Only those who will acknowledge that Allah is Allah and Muhammad is his final prophet shall be saved, and all others, it's down to the barbecue. As for Buddha and Krishna, as a matter of fact, they are less arrogant and less presumptuous than either Muhammad or Jesus. They never made such claims, at least in most of the Hindu and Buddhist traditions. They are dividing into a whole bunch of different religions. And they have an argument of something of all rivers lead to the same ocean. So to say that the only one who offers that, no, any religion that claims to be universal claims that they are the ones who offer the atonement. It's likewise that the Mohammedans, the Muslims, claim that they are the fulfillment of the Old Testament. The Christians, Jesus and the apostles came and said, God gave the Torah, first edition. Then came a revised edition called the New Testament, and that's it. Then came the Muslims, said nonsense. God came as a second edition, they accept Jesus, but then God came as a third edition, and the third edition is the final edition. Then, of course, comes Joseph Smith in the Book of the Mormons. Then, of course, you have all the others, etc., etc. Where's it going to end? Yes, the Christians came as the book to all the natives and so forth. They came as the book in one hand and the cross in the other. And they said, you better kiss this or this kisses you. And that's how they became converted. And as for conversion, the Muslims converted just as many. As a matter of fact, the Muslim religion is the largest growing religion in the world, and there are at least as many as Muslims as there are Christians, especially if you don't even accept most Christians as being true Christians. As for the fruits of the beliefs in Jesus, look at the fruits. I know plenty of people who have been saved and taken out of the gutter from drugs and promiscuity by joining the Moonies, by joining Scientology, by joining Hare Krishna, by joining every cult that you can imagine. If you really believe in something, it will fix you up. Whether you believe in idolatry, you believe in nonsense, or you believe in yourself, it makes no difference. So therefore, I'm not impressed by the fruits of Jesus or Christianity.
Mr. Brown?
Well, I didn't expect to amaze you, but I'm pleased that I've been amazing you tonight. Is there the same kind of atonement in Islam? Absolutely not. I had the pleasure of studying Arabic and studying the Quran in Arabic. No, it does not offer atonement for sin through the shedding of blood. Islam claims to be the fulfillment of Hebrew Bible, New Covenant. It's true, except the Bible of the Quran is not the same Bible. It's greatly changed. The New Testament is greatly changed. The claim in the Quran is that the Jews and Christians corrupted the original text and they alone have the true one. Whereas what I'm talking about is getting the actual Hebrew Bible in translation or in the original Hebrew to people around the world who then worship the God of Israel. And in fact, there's one interesting thing, Hebrew Scriptures plus something, called rabbinic literature. Instead of one book, it's volume after volume after volume after volume. That doesn't leave the Hebrew Bible alone. It says you need our tradition too. Conversion through book and cross, no, no, no. There were aberrations, so-called Christians who persecuted. That is the exception to the universal rule around the world.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
That's a very... How many percent do you have?
That was his 1-minute rebuttal. The closing statements or the questions are finished. We're going to closing statements. We will now have 2 6-minutes, no new topics, so on and so forth, but to use their closing statements to wrap up the subject of the debate itself. Dr. Brown.
Rabbi Shochet has said that every single debate that has ever been held between Jew and Christian has been won by Jews. Tonight that couldn't be possible because we're both Jews. But we put that aside. When we agreed to do this debate, I was invited, Rabbi Shochet was invited. I considered him to be one of the top representatives of what is known as the anti-missionary position. We've been very careful to go through guidelines and even who would go first, last, timing, and certain things decided by the flip of the coin, etc. And one key thing to me was that everything had to be audio and videotaped. Why? Because at the outset I said to beware of sweeping, bombastic statements, whether by me or by Rabbi Shochet. What I'd encourage you to do is, when these things are accessible, to go through very carefully, look up texts, go through references. A key text Rabbi Shochet quoted, I want you to be able to check, was Matthew 23. He said Luke 23, but he meant Matthew 23. That's what he had in his notes. So if you want to look that up, I'm telling you where it is. And if I missed any rabbinic citations, you can check with him and he can set that right also. Now, the whole idea that he gave all of these qualifications, signs of the Messiah. And I said, nowhere did it say the Messiah would do it. And then at the end I said, when Jesus returns, he'll fulfill these. What was my point? My point was, who says those are the only Messianic passages in the Bible? So what I did was I demonstrated through quoting various passages that are either totally self-evidently Messianic, by the terms and figures used being the same as elsewhere. For example, Tzemach, branch, is universally recognized as a Messianic title, so I showed her that that was a priestly king. Or, for example, Isaiah 53, which has an excellent background of rabbinic tradition, interpreting it messianically. It was interpreted of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in his sickness as messianic. The point there is very simple. I showed text after text after text that is messianic in content, that is messianic as recognized by tradition, and said this had to happen also. To say that I showed nothing, demonstrated nothing, is basically like hitting 1,000 and then saying you just struck out every time. Check, look, observe. Why did I quote Talmud? Well, I was told that authentic Judaism rejects this position outright. I was told that you could not believe in the New Testament and be faithful to historic Judaism. Therefore, it behooved me to demonstrate that Rabbinic Judaism is not, in fact, the authentic or historic Judaism, but just another tradition of man. As to the idea that there is an unbroken chain of tradition going back to Moses, and without it you can't understand anything, let's be honest. Take a fundamental law of Torah that if people commit certain sins, they will be karet, cut off. The rabbinic tradition isn't sure between two options what it actually means. It's forgotten the meaning of certain animals, unclean animals, which they exactly are, how to identify them. Get a book like Arya Kaplan's Living Torah. Go through the notes and you'll see so many interpretations, so many ideas. Why? Because there is no unbroken tradition going back to Moses. In point of fact, only ultra-Orthodox Jewish scholars today will speak of that. Most modern Orthodox scholars will not even speak of an unbroken chain of tradition. You say, but I had my chain of tradition by which I interpreted texts. No, I went to the context. Read the context of the various passages quoted. Read the context of Matthew 23, where Jesus says, don't follow their example. Read the end of Matthew 21 when he says, yes, you sit in leadership now, but the authority will soon be taken away from you. No, Jesus did not say that we are forever to be under rabbinic law. There's a man named Rabbi Daniel Tzion. He was the chief rabbi of Bulgaria, helped to save many Jews from the Holocaust, settled in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, where he lived out the rest of his life there. He was a fervent believer in Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah. In spite of all objections raised to him, I know others, religious Jews, who have put their faith in Jesus, the Messiah. I know some who have been beaten, some who have been persecuted. The persecution has gone both ways at times. The fact is very simple. If you will seek God with all of your heart and all of your soul, because we have many prejudices. It's said in the Psalms, Gal enai va'abita niflaot mitoratecha. Open my eyes, uncover them, that I can behold wonders in your Torah, in your law, and your teaching. I'd encourage you, seek God and say, look, I'm a weak human vessel. I don't know everything. Give me wisdom, give me insight as I study the text, and read on your own. Jewish believers in Jesus, I urge you to read through the scriptures carefully, to look at them, to look into the New Testament and see if in fact your faith stands on strong ground, as I determined to do over 20 years ago. I encourage rabbinic Jews and atheistic Jews and others, read through the Hebrew Bible, seek God, study, look, and see if in fact Jesus, Yeshua, is the prophesied Messiah. I rejoice to say that in fact the fastest growing religion is not Islam, but New Testament believing Christianity. The turn of this century, 1 out of every 13,000 Africans believed in Jesus. Now it's 1 out of 3. God is moving, not with a sword, not with outward coercion, but by His Spirit, through His Word, changing lives. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who puts his trust in Him. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Dr. Choquette, you have 6 minutes, sir, for your closing statement.
Shall I say amaze me again? Dr. Brown still misses the point. I'm prepared to accept every single passage in the Old Testament to be Messianic. Even those that he didn't mention. Even those that nobody mentions. And I'll still say, even if they are, so what? What has that got to do with Jesus? You want to find similarities? Well, let me tell you, I am prepared to stand here in front of you tonight and tell you that every single passage that is referred to by Christians to refer to Jesus applies to me no less. That I have as many claims to be the Messiah as Jesus has any time. Plus more, that I have a paternal link to King David which he doesn't have. Secondly, to say that modern Orthodox do not believe in an unbroken chain of tradition, that is sheer nonsense. A ludicrous lie. To say that there are Jews who have accepted Jesus, and he quotes even rabbis. Do you want me to quote how many priests and ministers and nuns and friars and who knows what else have dropped Christianity and became Jews or became Muslims or became Buddhists, etc., etc. So what does that prove? That a person has a certain weakness or a person allowed himself to be persuaded by emotional arguments, etc., etc. What kind of an argument is that? The onus of proof is still upon them, and so far they haven't proven a thing. Read carefully says, yes, read carefully by all means. I once dealt with a young man who got involved with Campus Crusade for Christ, became the main recruiter on the campus in San Diego. I spent a few hours with him, and at the end of it I told him one thing. Look, I'm not asking you to listen to my interpretations of what I say. Thing and one thing only. Go home tomorrow. Stay away from them, stay away from me, and stay away from the rabbis. Start reading the Old Testament, starting with Genesis 1:1. Don't look at Jewish interpretations, don't look at theirs. And then keep reading straightforward. And as you come to various passages, ask yourself, what does this mean? It took him 2 days to drop the whole thing. 2 days. Now back to my closing statement. I think I've clearly given you the reasons why historical Judaism rejects categorically any suggestion that the Christian Savior is or might be the Messiah, or at least the Jewish Messiah, and B, why it is impossible for to be a faithful Jew when accepting the New Testament or the Christian Savior. Christianity feels an obvious kinship to Judaism, but not vice versa. The Christian faith and scriptures mean absolutely nothing to the Jew, just as Islam or Hinduism mean nothing to the Jew or the Christian. We have no quarrel with the Christians, Muslims or Hindus. We respect other people's religions and are opposed to seeking their conversion to bring them into our ranks. If necessary, though, we shall respond firmly to any attacks on our beliefs, and especially the vicious and evil obsession to missionize Jews, to the egotistical, sanctimonious self-righteousness of exclusivists who proclaim their religion to be the one and only truth for all mankind. Yes, there is absolute truth, but it's not yours, it's not mine, it's God's. And that no man cometh unto God except by their way. As Coleridge said, he who begins by loving, he was a Christian, he who begins by loving Christianity better than truth will proceed by loving his own sect or church better than Christianity and end in loving himself better than all. I couldn't have said it better. Our real concern is his missionary attempts to proselytize Jews. Mostly easy prey, totally ignorant of their own identity, young children, bedridden in hospitals, and at least one person here in this audience knows who and what I'm talking about. Defenseless elderly in nursing homes. Shmat, the conversion of a Jew to another faith, is to us worse than physical death. It is the brutal murder of a Jew's soul, cutting off his connection with God and salvation. Christians and devout believers of any religion should understand that, for they feel the same way about their own identity, their own children, brothers and sisters. They, no less than we, regard the leading astray of their children into alien cults or religions as the worst tragedy. So do not do unto others what you would not want others to do unto you. Leave Jews alone. The last 2,000 years of history of go out into the hedges and compel them to enter, and to the Jew first, is the very root and branch of anti-Semitism, which has brought us 2,000 years of relentless persecutions, suffering and bloodshed, from Rome through the Crusades, the Inquisition, the continuous pogroms. This mission to the Jews under all its guises, whether going by the name of the various churches, Hebrew Christians, Jews for Jesus, Messianic Jews, or what have you, is the very heart and soul of Nazism, which in our days resulted in the Holocaust of 6 million Jews. It is the fruit of a very, very bad tree. For a good tree brings forth good fruits, and only a bad tree brings forth bad fruits. In the words of Micah, For all the peoples, each man walks in the ways of his God, and as for us, we shall walk in the name of God, our God, forever and ever. I doubt very much whether anyone has been swayed by tonight's presentations or by any other debate of this kind. Most believing Christians are committed to their dogmas of faith, and no arguments, regardless of sound or logical, will persuade them otherwise. Torah Judaism, the historical Jewish tradition, is based on the absolute evidence of God's public appearance at Sinai, revealing himself to over 2 million Jews and verifying to them the unquestionable authenticity of Moses, historical proof passed on in documentary and oral tradition for over 3,500 years. Thus, it is logically impossible that the knowledgeable Jew can ever forgo that unbroken chain of tradition and historical record for the personal allegation and belief for anything or anyone who would want to change one jot or one tittle of that tradition by adding or subtracting anything. Thus, enough with all this nonsense. Let Jews be faithful Jews, even as Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, or Hindus should be allowed to believe what they wish. I had some more, but time is up.
That concludes the formal debate section. We did, however, promise to you that at some point you would have an opportunity of expressing your thanks to the gentlemen for their preparation and their work, and I think this would be an appropriate time to do so. Mr. Hinkle now has some closing announcements for us.
Thank you for your attendance at this evening's debate. It is our hope that it has been enlightening and thought-provoking for everyone present. We would like to briefly acknowledge the various persons and organizations that have worked together so hard to make this evening's debate a success. First, Mr. Garfield Green and the Arizona State University chapter of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, who are the sponsors of this event. To our debater in the affirmative, Dr. Michael Brown. To our distinguished debater in the negative, Dr. Emmanuel Choquette. To our moderator, Mr. James White. And to our panel members, Ms. Jennifer Norrie. Mr. Randy Nussbaum. And Mr. Michael Simonson. And thank you, audience, for your attendance and participation. Shalom and good night.
Well, were you able to learn a few things through listening to the debate? The recording is not the greatest, and he has a heavy accent. Sure. From what you could understand. Some of the issues that we've covered as part of our Answering Anti-Missionaries class, right? The Messianic Apologetics. You heard a couple of those issues being brought up by Rabbi Choquette. And having gone through the class, did the class help you with some of those answers? With some of those issues that Rabbi Choquette brought up? There were times, to be brutally honest, there were times where I felt a little sorry for Rabbi Choquette because he was clearly outclassed. He was clearly outmatched. Yes. His arguments, to be bluntly honest, I've listened to numerous debates. I've listened to numerous debates between Jewish believers in Messiah Yeshua and anti-missionaries. And there are debates which are much, much better than that, which really challenge you maybe a little bit more, brings you out of your comfort zone. Some of the arguments that Rabbi Choquette brings up are pretty weak, to say the least. Dr. Brown started off his portion talking about, speaking of be weary or be warned about listening to sweeping, bombastic arguments. And at times, that's what it seemed all Rabbi Choquette had done, was just give these sweeping, bombastic arguments that had no substance whatsoever, that had no validity whatsoever. He was consistently taking things out of context, consistently quoting or referencing the Brit Hadashah, passages in the Brit Hadashah, completely 100% out of context. There may have been a handful of those arguments which would have been difficult to understand outside of Jewish context. He spoke of issues of the law. He spoke of Yeshua violating the law, that Yeshua was somehow immoral and opposed the law and violated the law, violated the Torah. He spoke of him being a Sabbath breaker without ever speaking of the context of those passages. Yeshua was no more a Sabbath breaker than the halakha today. Halakha that permits for the preservation of life. That if you work in the fire department, or if you work as a police officer, or if you work in the medical field, that type of thing, even the military, that you're exempt from certain aspects, if not all aspects, of keeping the Sabbath, because the preservation of life takes precedence. And yet that issue was never brought up. It was never, the idea of alleviating human suffering was never brought up. Yeshua was accused of elevating himself and saying, I am the Lord of the Sabbath, when he did not say that. That is not what he said. He said the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And when you read it within its proper context, Yeshua is not talking about himself, he's talking about mankind. As he said, the Sabbath wasn't made for, man wasn't made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for mankind. So when he says the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, he was not speaking of himself. He was speaking of mankind is Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. So it is not a violation of the Sabbath to alleviate human suffering, even on the Sabbath. And that's why Yeshua spoke of, which one of you, if their oxen falls into a ditch or their donkey falls into a ditch, would not go out and rescue their donkey? But how much more a human? How much more a human who is suffering? He knows better. He knows better. He does. And that's why it can be a little frustrating sometimes, because there's so much dishonesty there. He knows better. He knows those arguments. Okay? He knows how to properly refute them. He is reliant upon the audience's ignorance to not know any better. He's dependent upon the argument or the audience listening to him, but never checking it out. That's why you hear Michael Brown over and over again. Check it out for yourself. Read it for yourself. Study it for yourself. Well, he accused Yeshua of mocking the Ten Commandments. That Yeshua somehow broke the Ten Commandments, which is ridiculous. Well, there are times where, certainly without understanding the full context of what was going on, that it could seem that way. And that's why it's important to read not only just any context, but you have to read within it first century Jewish context, and understand that at this time, this was before his mother and his brothers had become followers of his, had believed in him. Up to this point, his mother still remembered the visitation of the angel Gabriel. She still remembered his virgin birth and things like that, but may have been wondering, what is he doing? And certainly his brothers had questioned him. They were trying to bring him home. They were trying to bring him home. They were trying, in their mind, let's rescue him. He's kind of gone off the deep end, because they didn't understand. Right. And he was calling into question their motives for bringing him home. And he was basically saying, I've got a greater mission. I've got a greater mission. Remember when he was on the cross, right? He honored his mother. He honored his mother by telling John, take care of her. Take care of her. He understood what it means to honor your father and mother. And understand, even within rabbinical Judaism, honoring your father and your mother, it does not mean that you can't disagree with them. Okay, it doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that they do or everything they say, but it does mean you respect and honor them. That when they're in your presence, you don't talk disrespectfully to them. You don't talk back to them. It also means, and one could think of it like the office of the president. We may not agree with whoever's in the office of president at the time. Okay, but if the president were to walk in, you still stand. Not because you necessarily agree with what they've done, that individual, but because you honor the position of the presidency. So it's the same way. Honoring your father and mother is not dependent upon whether or not you like them or agree with them. It is dependent upon their position is worthy of honor. Even if they haven't earned it, their position is worthy of honor. It also means, and Yeshua speaks about this very clearly, honoring your father and your mother also means to take care of them. That they have taken care of you. They have raised you. They have taught you. And there will come a time where they will be dependent upon you, and you are to take care of them. That's why Yeshua rebuked some of the Pharisees, right, for tithing mint and cumin, and declaring something korban. In other words, they are declaring something as holy, sanctified, set apart. I have set this apart for God. Therefore, I can't give it to my parents. Right. Absolutely. And he clearly speaks of one's parents in that case. That it's important that you honor your parents both in word and in deed, monetarily as well. That means you take care of them when they're in their need. Now, granted, in our society today, things have changed so much because the government has become our caretakers. So we oftentimes, scoot them off to have the government take care of them instead of taking on that responsibility ourselves. And I think in many ways we lose a great blessing that is there. That the blessing of taking on that responsibility to minister to our parents. So Yeshua clearly supported all of the commandments, all 613 commandments of God, within their proper context. As Dr. Brown said, that there were some rabbinical opinions that he disagreed with, but who didn't? Understand that the vast amount of halakha that we have now was not born overnight. There were still great debates as to how do you keep the Sabbath? What does it mean to violate the Sabbath? Is it okay to heal on the Sabbath? How far can you travel on the Sabbath? What does it mean to honor your mother and your father? Some of those basic things that are part of even the 10 commandments or the 10 sayings were still being debated as to how are they to be lived out. So Yeshua had his opinion on that, and I believe it's a righteous opinion. Of course, we believe he is the author of the very Torah. But he was giving his rabbinical drash on the commandments of God. Nowhere was he standing against them. Nowhere was he teaching against them. We all know this, right? In Matthew 5, I've not come to do away, right? But to fulfill. Rabbi Dr. Shochet tried to, again, use that word fulfill, that he fulfilled the law against him without ever understanding what was being used there. I believe the Greek word there is plerou, fulfill, which means to make full, or to make full, to bring about its intended purposes. Not fulfill as in bring to an end, but to fulfill and to fill full. To fill it full of life. So he came to fulfill in bringing life to the Torah, to bring its intended purpose, to bring its intended meaning. He did not come to do away with, but to give its proper interpretation, to give the heart of the Torah. Are there any other questions and thoughts before we close? I know we got some more questions here. Were there anything that he asked? Because Rabbi Choquette kind of glossed over a bunch of supposed objections, in his mind anyway. And it was really difficult for Dr. Brown to answer all of them. Is there anything that's still in question that you go, I'm not sure how you answer that? Well, and I think I know what you're talking about there. Correct. And what Rabbi Choquette is attempting to do, and it's done quite often by anti-missionaries, is to point out those passages, those prophetic passages that are seen as Messianic passages, yet have obviously not been fulfilled yet. So how do we answer that? Well, Dr. Brown, answered it fairly quick by essentially saying, well, how do we know those are the only Messianic passages? There's other Messianic passages as well. The only way Rabbi Choquette's weight has any argument is if you completely dismiss the idea of a suffering servant. Of the suffering servant, and the Messiah must come only into the age. All of those promises that are at the end of the age. If that is the only way his weight has any argument whatsoever. The reason Daniel Lancaster put it like this, he said, that is the very reason we are called believers, because we believe when he does return, he will fulfill those things. He will fulfill those things. But all of those passages which speak of blood atonement, all of those passages, all of those prophecies, all of those midrash associations that the apostolic scriptures use, all of those word pictures that are found throughout the scriptures, the sod, the drash, the remez, the pashat of the text, all of those things speak of him. And so many of them speak of him coming as suffering servant. They speak of him coming as the Lamb of God, as John says, who takes away the sin of the world. And you notice that Rabbi Choquette didn't reference any of those, right? He didn't reference any of those prophecies. He only referenced those prophecies that we are waiting for him to return to fulfill. But when you look at those prophecies that speak of his coming as suffering servant, as the Lamb of God, as our blood atonement, as Dr. Brown rightfully said, he hit the target. The arrow hit the target perfectly. The only problem is that the rabbis moved the target. The rabbis later moved the target and claimed that he didn't hit the target at all. Well, no, that's not the case. One of the example we've talked about, right, of how the rabbis moved the target is Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53, well, we can find, and we've spoken of this during our teaching times, how Isaiah 53 clearly is spoken of throughout rabbinical literature as being a messianic passage. But today, Isaiah 53, it's not a messianic passage at all. It's just speaking about Israel as a nation, right? They moved the target. They simply moved the target. Isabel, you had a question.
Yeah, this is a good question to ask them, I think. There are different texts that they seem to disagree, so the only way that you could explain it is by having two coming. Through
good exegetical gymnastics. you have to do some serious gymnastics. Okay, the Talmud speaks of the Messiah could come in two ways, right? Because it talks of Messianic passages, it seem to contradict one another. Because it speaks of the Messiah coming lowly riding on a donkey, right? And it also speaks of the Messiah coming riding on a cloud as conquering king. So how do you reconcile those things? Well, we reconcile those by saying, well, he did come lowly riding on a donkey 2,000 years ago as the suffering servant, as priest, right? He came as priest. He will come again as king. He will return to take up his earthly throne. His job as priest was served when he gave up his life. When his blood was taken to the heavenly tabernacle and offered upon the altar, he served as priest. Now, when he returns, he will serve as king. That being said, the anti-missionaries argue that, well, the reason those two passages are there, those two references to the Messiah's coming are there, is because if we are worthy of him, he will come as a great king riding on a cloud. But if we are unworthy, if we're not worthy of him, then he will come lowly riding on a donkey. So the way the anti-missionaries, or modern Judaism, the Talmud, let me rephrase that, the way the Talmud answers that is, well, it's either or. It's not both, it's either or. Either this way or he will come this way, depending on whether or not we're worthy of his coming. I personally have some issues with that, that it's either or. But that's one way of answering that objection from a rabbinical perspective is, well, it's either or. And if he was worthy, great. Then he'll come as king, as conquering king. If not, then he'll come riding lowly on a donkey, right? Any other questions? Yes.
What he was saying
I know those. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I know those passages he's referencing, and they're very shallow arguments, to say the least. Very shallow arguments completely. Virtually all of them, and Dr. Brown is correct, virtually all of them are taken completely out of context. They are completely out of context. They are fundamentally wrong. And any true scholar, even Jewish non-believers, any true scholars, like David Flusser is an example of blessed memory, they know better. They know better. They know the context in which those passages were spoken. And Dr. Brown was right in quoting and referencing some of those other Jewish rabbinical and educational sources to refute Rabbi Shoket's arguments, because Rabbi Shoket's arguments, truly, his arguments that Yeshua was a Sabbath breaker, that he was a violator of the Torah, that he was a violator of Judaism, that is a minority opinion. Almost all scholars, true scholars, recognize that no, that is not the case. He is clearly, when he walked amongst us, even those unbelievers, right? Unbelievers in Yeshua as the Messiah, recognized that he was clearly a Jew. Not just a Jew, but a Jew who upheld the Torah, who lived according to the Torah, who was righteous according to the Torah, who was faithful according to the Torah. I'm working on a paper right now for a class. I've been doing a little bit more research in this area, but it is my opinion. It is my opinion that Yeshua, being first and foremost the Son of God, but he was also a man. He also came and he walked in human form. And we don't want to forget the humanity of Yeshua as well. And as part of the humanity of Yeshua, he was obviously educated. He was obviously, had some influence in certain areas, certain groups, certain theological backgrounds or perspectives he sided closer with than others. And we would say that clearly he was much closer to the Pharisees than he was the Sadducees. But it is my belief, when you look at his life and you look at the life that he lived, it is my belief that he was closer to the early Hasidim community, the early Hasidim community. And we think of the Hasidim. I'm not talking about modern day Hasidim who was the founder being the Baal Shem Tov. Okay, I'm not talking about the Middle Ages Hasidim. There are three groups that associate with Judaism that has been referred to as the Hasidim. It is the first group that I'm speaking of. It's the first group that is called the Hasidim that is mentioned in the book of Maccabees as those who joined forces with Judah Maccabee in defense of Israel against Antiochus Epiphanes. They are referenced as the Hasidim. It was the Hasidim who were miracle workers. They were known to be men of great faith, who performed great number of miracles. Those like Rabbi Honi, the circle drawer, and Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, and a numerous amount of others who were a part of the Hasidim movement of the first century. And it is my belief that he was clearly within that group more so than any other group, that he was probably closely associated with those groups. In fact, the Pharisees and the Essenes were clearly born out of the early Hasidim movement. They were birthed from the Hasidim movement, and probably the Hasidim movement were eventually kind of swallowed up after the destruction of the temple by the Pharisees and by the rabbinical community. But the Hasidim was a predominant force throughout most of the Second Temple period. And I believe that Yeshua clearly falls within that group. When you study that group, when you study the early Hasidim, especially, it really makes perfect sense what Yeshua taught, how he taught, and his arguments and his debates, his polemics. It's clear that he falls within first century Judaism. But remember, in first century, there was not a Judaism. There were Judaisms. There were many Judaisms. There were the Essenes. There were the Sadducees. There were the Zealots. There were the Pharisees. There were the Hasidim. There were and numerous other groups. Those are the most popular, the most common. But there were numerous other groups within Judaism at the time. There were many Judaisms at the time. So to say that, well, Yeshua could not have been a good Jew since he did not line up with modern rabbinical Judaism and modern rabbinical Jewish teaching, or even all Pharisaical Judaism, well, that means he couldn't be a good Jew and he couldn't be a follower of the Torah, right? That denies the fact that there were many Judaisms. And though he was certainly closer to the Pharisees than he was probably most of the groups, that didn't mean that he aligned up perfectly with either the house of Hillel or the house of Shammai. Yes, even today, you're right. They're conservative, reform, reconstructionist, humanistic. I was really surprised last time I went out to the Boulder Jewish Festival and there was a humanistic synagogue. How did that happen? I don't know. But there's a humanistic synagogue in Colorado. Of course, we know there's modern Orthodoxy, there's centrist Orthodoxy, there's Haredi Judaism, there's Hasidic Judaism. Now let's look at Hasidic Judaism. Well, you think there's a lot of denominations within the church? Let's look at Hasidic Judaism. You have the Breslov, you have the Chabad, you have the Chabad Lubavitch, same thing. You have the Belts, you have the Ger, you have the Bobov, you have the Satmar. I mean, the list goes on and on. The number of groups, the number of sects within even Hasidic Judaism. It's pretty expansive. So there are many Judaisms, and you will find varying opinions within that Judaism. Yes. Yeah, it's the celebrate diversity sign or something along that line. Coexist. Yeah, that's right. Coexist. That's it's. And forgive me for getting a little too political, but since you brought it up, it's just typical left left type dialogue to say, well, can't we all just get along type of a thing? When in reality, it's like, we're going to celebrate diversity. We're going to celebrate all diversity and all tolerance, except, of course, for religious Jews and Christians. It's there's only tolerance for everybody except those groups, right? So I don't give any weight to that, the coexist bumper sticker, because it isn't coexist at all. It's like bumper sticker theology. It doesn't say a whole lot. It just doesn't say a whole lot. Well, I think one way is we ourselves. Yeshua teaches us that we must be faithful to deal with the plank in our own eye before we deal with the speck in somebody else's, right? The speck in our brother's eye. And we have to be faithful with who we are. We have to be honest as far as Messianic Judaism and some of our issues before we can really deal with the church and Judaism. I mean, we can be critical, but, I'm being critical of some of the rabbis, but, I'm being critical of some of the rabbis because I see them as my brothers and sisters in the Lord, not because I see them as my enemy. It's Yeshua did that. Yeshua, he spent very little time focusing on the Sadducees. Why didn't he argue with the Sadducees? Why? They were so far off on left field. He had so little concern for them. Or let me rephrase. I think he had concern, so little interest in their movement. And the reason is because he saw right through them. He knew their hearts were far from God. But the Pharisees, he saw them as their brothers, as his brothers and sisters, so he could debate with them, sometimes harshly. Sometimes, he would be brutally honest. But you know what? The rabbis were brutally honest with each other too, And I think we can have that discussion. We can have those debates and see ourselves as brothers and sisters. But it starts here. It starts with being honest with ourselves and saying, I don't know all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I believe in Scripture. I believe in His Word, and I will study His Word, and I will be faithful to follow Him and pray. Pray. This is one of my prayers that I think is so essential for me. And I think ultimately for all of us, and that is, Lord, teach me your ways. Teach me your ways. Write your words upon my heart, because there's so much I don't understand. There are some things that are black and white in Scripture you can't avoid. But there are some things where we've got to be careful about being dogmatic on certain issues and saying, well, this is the only way it is, and tough luck otherwise. Look at those areas where we can find unity. Look, I have a lot of disagreement with my Christian brothers and sisters, whether, they come from an evangelical Protestant background or a Catholic background or Anglican or what have you. There's some theological issues that I have there, and I can openly debate. But I also don't have a problem going to their church and leading a Passover Seder when they invite me to come. And can you lead us in a Passover Seder? Can you teach us some things? I don't have a problem there because it helps create dialogue and it helps us both learn. I can learn a little bit more about them. They can learn a little bit more about me. Yeah, I have some disagreements with them. Now, there's also, I think we've got to be careful. There's a fine line where it's obvious that a people or a group or what have you is verging into occultism. And it becomes dangerous. And their hearts are obviously far from God. They serve themselves. And I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that we need to go out and start ministering and yoking arms with Westboro Baptist Church. God forbid. That's not what I'm talking about at all. It's obvious their hearts are far from God. Or that we need to reach out and somehow find some type of unity and peace with radical Islam. No. I'm sorry, it's evil. It's corrupt, it's evil, it's of the enemy. Correct. I'll never forget the experience I had. It really was one of those life-changing experiences. I was up at New Life Church, at World Prayer Center at New Life Church, with myself and Bill Malone and Rep. James Oviedo. We were invited to come up. They were having a broadcast. They was being broadcast to churches and things like that all over the world. And the building was packed out. There was probably a good couple thousand people there. And they were having a prayer time, a worship time, and they also asked us to come up and share a few words on Messianic Judaism, recite a couple of blessings or what have you. So we went up there, and I shared a couple of things. The other teachers had shared a couple of things. And it was early in the morning, and I went from there, went straight to work. Walked out of the building, was leaving, and I heard behind me there was this man, calling at me. He says, Rabbi, please turn around. Rabbi, I need to talk to you. And I turned around. Here's this man, very olive-colored skin, short, black hair, huge, just tall, just husky, just huge. I mean, he was probably a good 350 pounds, 6'4", 6'5", something like that. I mean, just big man. And I turned around. He has his arms wide open, and he comes to me, and he is just bawling. These huge tears are running down his eyes. And he wraps his arms around me, and he says, I need to hug you. And then he says, I want you to know that I am Palestinian. And I came to faith in Yeshua as the Messiah. And I want to apologize to you for what my people have done to your people. When we can have that kind of honesty, that kind of openness, that kind of heart, that's how those bridges are built. That's how those walls are torn down. Not through, theological debates and saying, well, we've all got to agree theological, but when we have the heart to seek after God, when we have the heart to be able to say, I want to meet with you. I want to fellowship with you. You are my brother and my sister. That's what will break down those walls. And I'm anxious to see those things continue to happen, because they are happening. Those who are seeking after the Lord, it is happening. At the same time, and I don't know, before he died, if Rabbi Choquette, I don't know what his life was like, if he ever came to faith privately, publicly, I don't know. The debate was in 95. I think he passed away around maybe 2007, 2008, something like that. So I'm guessing what the year I think he passed away. But it was obvious at the time of that debate that there was a lot of bitterness there. There was a lot of anger there. There was a heart that wanted nothing whatsoever to do with Jewish believers. And one could likewise extend that by saying there was a heart there that most likely wanted nothing to do with anybody who wasn't an Orthodox Jew. Oh, most of them, yeah, to a certain degree, yes. And that's because to the Christian, the mindset is, well, you're a Christian, that's great. Just don't try to convert me to Judaism. Or don't try to convert me to Christianity. I'm sorry. Leave us alone. We can dialogue. We can have a great time. That's wonderful. Okay? To us, we are seen as a threat. Okay? Because we don't look like evangelical Christians. We don't act like evangelical Christians. We're not necessarily evangelical Christians. We're not Protestant. We're not Catholic. We don't fit into any of those groups. We are, well, according to them, we're not Jewish, right? We are followers of the Jewish Messiah. We are followers of the Jewish Messiah, whether Jew or Gentile. We are followers of the Jewish Messiah, and we are followers of the Jewish Scripture, of the Jewish disciples, the Jewish apostles. And we seek to live a harmonious life that elevates the Judaism of the apostles, that elevates the Judaism of the Messiah, Yeshua. I am here today, first and foremost, because of my Messiah, because of my Lord. I am here today. Judaism is a beautiful religion. It's beautiful. It's got so many elements in it that are wonderful. But what makes it wonderful is because who he is. If you remove him from it, would Judaism have an attraction to me? Well, I think to a certain degree, just as many were attracted to Judaism, especially women, in the first century were attracted to Judaism compared to all the paganisms of the world, right? But it is Yeshua that attracts me to Judaism first and foremost and most importantly. Yes. That's why Paul was able to, in his own way, kind of boast, look at who I am. I am the Jew of Jews. I am a Pharisee of Pharisees. I keep the Torah perfectly. I have not violated any statute of the Torah, any statute of Jewish rabbinical tradition. And yet I count it all as rubbish compared to the glory of my Lord. It's all rubbish compared to that. And it's usually that's usually interpreted as Paul is saying, well, he's casting all those things away. No, that's not what he's saying. Sometimes. But those things are starting to change a little bit too. Right. Well, in many ways, there's a lot of... Sure. Right. I understand, yeah. And many, and again, not all, but many view, obviously there's a lot of, still a lot of friction between most Protestant churches and Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, there's still a lot of animosity there. And if you speak to somebody who's part of the evangelical church, you speak to them about Catholicism, that's, in their view, it's occultism. That's way off. And no, you're not really saved. You're involved in the Catholic Church. Well, and a lot of Christians view us in that way, like we're Catholic. I remember when my grandmother found I was attending a Messianic synagogue, and I had to go to her because she's Catholic, or she was before she passed. My father's mother, she was a very devout Catholic. Went several times a week to Mass, the whole nine yards, just very devout. And I came to her and I told her, I'm studying Messianic Judaism. And I thought she'd be a little upset. She wasn't. She was thrilled. She was thrilled because I wasn't Protestant, but she was thrilled. She thought, she had all sorts of questions and we talked and things like that, And it really was. There was an issue there. Hey, you're not Protestant. I'm okay. And it's the same thing, Right. That is true. We do. Yeah, I've been asked that a number of times. Well, okay, you're a Messianic. You're Messianic. You're going to a Messianic synagogue. You believe that Yeshua is the Jewish Messiah, but you still believe in Jesus, right? Okay. Yes, I do. So there. I hope that answers it. Well, I think, and to speak to what you were talking about, I think one of the issues that we see is, again, I'm not trying to overly criticize the church or anything like that, but we are told to go to the Jew first, right? We are told to minister to our Jewish brethren and to teach them about Yeshua the Messiah. And yet that seems to be on the last people group on the list of many evangelicals and other Christian groups as well. We will go to the four corners of the earth to convert the pagan. We will go to Africa. We will go to Antarctica. We will go to South America. We'll go to China and all of these places. And yet the Jewish people seem to be last on the list so often. That's a good point. And maybe there's a little bit of intimidation there, but there is one thing, and that is that when the church finally reads Yeshua's words properly, when he says, "What you do to my brethren, you do to the least of my brethren, you do to me," and when they finally realize those words of the Master as he's coming into Jerusalem for the last time, and he says, "Jerusalem, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" And when the church finally realizes that, I think that Jewish people accepting Yeshua as the Messiah seems to play a pretty big role in the return of Yeshua, maybe then we'll see some more evangelistic work. That being said, I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff, but think about this, okay? Joseph, as he's standing before his brethren, right? His brethren do not know him. His brethren do not recognize him. Their eyes are blinded. In essence, their eyes are blinded to who is their Redeemer, the one who would rescue them and save them. And they stand before him, not knowing. Judah falls on his knees and begins to plead before Joseph, not knowing who Joseph was. Not knowing that it was their brother, the one they had persecuted, the one they had sold into slavery, the one they had turned over to the Gentiles, the one they had betrayed. And Joseph cleared out the room. He began to weep, and he cleared out the room where nobody was left but him and his brethren. And then he revealed himself. He told his brethren who he was. Maybe, and this is my own little drosh here, but perhaps one of the reasons the evangelical church or the church in general has avoided really ministering to the Jewish people about Yeshua the Messiah is because it's a part of God's plan that the Jewish people are not completely assimilated into the church. That it is to be within Judaism, that you have to see the rise of Messianic, authentic Messianic Judaism to draw Jewish believers to Messiah. Because we've all seen too many cases where a Jewish believer or a Jew becomes a believer and becomes assimilated into the church, and there's virtually no Jewish identity left. That is true. You're absolutely right. I believe, and not that we are anything special, but God clearly, I think, has a plan. God clearly is working through Messianic Judaism for a purpose and for a reason. And Baruch Hashem, I'm glad that he is included as a part of his plan, because he really doesn't need us, but he has chosen to use us to be a part of his plan. He has chosen to use us to be a part of Messianic, to be a part of drawing his people to him. When his people come to faith, they need a place to go. They need a place to go that they can retain their Jewish heritage. They can hold on to their Jewish heritage, not just retain it and hold on to it, but thrive in it. Where they see the fullness of their heritage through the Jewish Messiah, not a rejection of their Jewish heritage in favor of, and forgive me, I'm going to be blunt, and again, I'm not trying to pick on anyone or anything, but I don't think it's God's will for the Jewish people to reject his feasts and festivals, to reject his Sabbath, to reject Hanukkah in favor of Christmas, to reject Passover in favor of Easter, to reject the Sabbath in favor of the Lord's Day. Nothing wrong with worshiping on Sunday. We should worship any day of the week. But the Lord chose the Sabbath, and he gave it to his people as a covenant. That's true. We have a hard time getting very far in that one, don't we? And given traditional Christian interpretation of that passage, Yeshua is essentially saying, I have not come to do away with it. I've not come to abolish it, but to fulfill it. However, by fulfilling it, I've abolished it. Yeah. Right? And when you interpret fulfill in that fashion is putting an end to, then it becomes a circular argument, right? Right. I've not come to do away with it, but to fulfill it. And by fulfilling it, to do away with it. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Right, yeah. The only way it really does make sense is to understand it. Fulfill, to make full, to bring about its intended purpose. Or Or, which I believe has a lot of weight to it, an argument is that to fulfill means to bring about its proper interpretation, where to abolish doesn't mean to do away with it, but to give a false interpretation. To abolish means to give a wrong interpretation. In other words, if I give you the wrong understanding, the wrong interpretation of the Torah, I've abolished it. Right? Right. Yeah. That's, yeah, in essence, yeah. So he's not come to give a false interpretation, but to give the correct interpretation, to help us to understand what it means, to fill it up, to walk in it. Well, I think we've talked long enough, right?